So the day is mostly on trees for bees today, and Barry and Linda will be leading that. I'm going to talk for the next 15 minutes about the oaks, and then we're handing over to Rodney, who will take us to the cathedral, and we will be talking about that exciting project up there. Then afterwards we walk back here, I believe, and we will be looking at trees. Then we have lunch here. We have a presentation on the plant finder that Linda has made for bee shrubs and trees. And then afterwards there are some really interesting trees to look at afterwards. So in 2021, Oak New Zealand was established, an action group of the Farm Forestry Association, and the purpose was to find elite trees that can be grown for a variety of reasons, partly erosion control, partly timber production for bees as well as for fodder. We have two main trial sites. One is at Ribanui with the Trimble Foundation in Masterton, and a very wet site. They've had similar problems than we have had here, especially with the deer. But we purchased 70 cages, deer protection cages. They were was quite expensive, about $3,800, but they have been working. The trial is about 7 different species, and I can quickly say that once, and then you will forget, and then if you have forgotten and you're still interested, you can ask me again. We have Quercus ellipsodalis, Calogii, Pagoda, Pilastrus, Rubra, Shumardi, and Texana. They are all deciduous red oaks from the US. Some of those oaks are putting on between 2.5 to 3 centimeters a year at heck falls. I believe that kind of increment is being banded around a little bit too often. You know, you can't really rely on that. But there are some really good oaks available. The trial design was 7 rows of 10 clusters. So each row is one type of seedling, and we got 70 trees. We got 70 trees in each row, and we got 5 trees per cluster. The best seedling was planted in the middle. The second best, hi Rob. The second best seedling was planted to the north, to the east, south, and west. So you got 5 trees planted within a 1 meter distance of each other, which makes finding them and releasing them a lot easier. If all of those 5 survive, then at age 3 the worst one goes, and at age 4 the next worst one is being cut out, and then we start pruning, and then after 6 or 7 years you end up with 1 seedling planted on 10 by 10 meters. It was a joint effort. The scientist behind this was Eric Cairns. Most of the farm foresters know Eric. We planted it in 2021. We had exceptionally good cooperation with Appleton nursery who provided the seedlings for free. Not all the seedlings were up to the standard that we actually expected, but there is a lot of demand for oaks, so we were quite happy that we got 350 free elite seedlings. The problems we've experienced, especially in the first year, was browsing by hares. And as a result of that, in last year, in 2022, we came in and with the help of Pultron, who supplied the fiberglass sticks, and quite a few of volunteers also from Wellington, Masterton and Whanganui. At the end of the 4-day field day that we had here last year, we spent a day and then Jack and I finished it off. We are doing the release spraying, and I'd like to acknowledge the good work that Phil and Ross have been doing at this trial as well. Especially Phil has spent a lot of time here establishing the trial. We've got all the pegs and seedlings GPS'd, and they've been provided to Eastwoodhill. But with Dan moving on and Maarten moving on, we don't know whether it actually sits in their GIS system. In June, we came back and did a measurement, so the trees have been measured twice now, and we've had some mortality, but considering the fact that there has been such pressure of pests, I'm actually not unhappy. One of the worst things that has happened is there have been slips on the track, which makes access to the trial quite hard, and we might not see that repaired in the next, well, who knows. The whole hill seems to be on the move. Yeah. To me. You can release the track and then the next downpour it comes down again. Yeah. There's only 2 spots where there's only 1 tree surviving, and there are quite a few spots where all 5 trees are surviving. Travis, one of the staff members here, since we last measured in June, he has killed 8 deer, 56 hares, and over 120 possums. So we're finally making a difference with the pest control, and that is the most important thing. I need to have a look at my agenda, but I would like to organize another working bee up here, and then we come in with little sickles and just hand weed around the trees, free them up, and then we can spray. Because spraying with the leaves in full, that's too dangerous now. We release sprayed in June, and the effects of that are visible, but we didn't get close enough to the trees. So you've got the trees, most of the trees are about this tall. There are some that are taller than a meter, but they are rare, you know. But a lot of them have got weeds, especially grasses, around the tree. So when we get some funding, I wouldn't mind, and better access, I wouldn't mind putting up a sign, not unlike what we did at the poplar trial at Gentle Annie, so that it is recorded what species is where and that people can find themselves. So that was about my oaks. Any questions, any remarks?
Can I just ask, you talked about seedlings, since they planted from seeds?
I would say so, yes.
Because
yes.
It just interests me that if you're planting a seed, every seedling will be genetically unique. So does that have any impact on what you're looking at.
Possibly, and in due time, we do envisage that this becomes a seed orchard. But the seeds, the acorns, were selected from elite trees and grown by Appletons. So since then, since 2021, Eric Cairns has started cloning of good oak material, of parent trees, but the ones that we planted here were seedlings.
Is cicada damage a problem? Likely to be?
I don't know.
Yeah, because they take
I don't
out
know.
native
I
stuff.
think compared with the deer and the hares, the cicadas
Just
are
when they,
possible.
yeah, when they take the leader out, you've got to start again, don't you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
On the way out to that oak trail, you pass a planting of red oaks that would have been put in the 1950s. They're on the right-hand side, overlooking the cathedral. If you can envisage, as you go around the track, there's a knob that is called the Three Kings, and that was planted in a collection of tin oaks, mostly red oaks. Nothing much was done until about the 1980s, when a couple of enthusiasts from the Bay of Plenty came over and they did a bit of thinning. Recently a few have blown over, there's a bit of wind damage in there, but they're they're getting on to a good age now. So it'd be worth, if Eric Cairns is up here, just stopping and having a look at that.
Yeah, he might know about them.
I'm
Yes.
sure he knows about them.
Yes.
But
Yes.
in conjunction with what you're putting in at work
Yeah.
at the moment,
Yeah.
they give a contrast between different age groups
Yeah.
and different survivability.
Yeah. Yeah. Would you like to speak a little bit on oaks and bees?
Oh, you want me to? I was going to save the story for when we got
Okay.
to the oak tree, but I can. Oaks are really. I'll just give an overview and I'll tell the story at the, there with how we discovered. We didn't know that oaks were so good for bees, but they are, and pretty much all of them are. The problem is you don't know age to maturity for flowering to start because the catkins pollen, and for each species, we don't have information on the age to maturity or how prolific and how dense the catkins are. So, but there's so many oaks. But we did, down in here, I think we capped it around somewhere between 5 and 10 oaks, and then I said enough, we've got to get some other diversity. So we tested the pollen, and it's good protein content in the pollen. And oaks are just, once you get a mature oak that's flowering repeatedly, the bees are it's just amazing. It's a really valuable bee plant.
Okay, for the new ones, could you explain how oaks are normally split between red oaks, white oaks, and English oaks? And like about, just in general terms, how people.
Both the white oak and the red oak are from the US. I don't know how many oaks there are in the US, but many different oaks. There is a book called Oaks, and in the book it explains how human civilization was very much based on the acorn, because they took the seeds with them, the nomads, the early people, the people from 20, 30,000 years ago, 10,000 years ago, and throughout the US you find evidence of specific trees and groves that were planted for the acorns and to make bread and things like that. And it's only when wheat came in about 5,000, 7,000 years ago that oak lost its prominence. And then you've got the English oak, Quercus robur, and that got crossed with a tree here, Quercus petraea, which is the French oak or the sessile oak, and that is what we call the Appleton's variety. And that one is apically dominant. If you've got no peacocks, you know, you've got peacocks, then there's no apically dominance anymore.
Okay, so a point of interest is Palmu, which will former Bangkok, have clicked on to trialling oaks. And I look after their plantations on the coast here. And across the country they've planted 33 different varieties of oaks this season, all of which have come from Appletons. We've planted 6 up at Paracanepa, 6 different varieties, all Mexican oaks. But we too have found that hares are your biggest problem. We used the woven wool mats for weed suppression so we didn't have to spray around them, and we sprayed over them with a product called plant skid, which is a deterrent. It didn't deter the hares, they just came in, so we're just in the process of putting 450mm high guards around each tree, which is very expensive, but we can't be there all the time to be monitoring them. So.
And we found that applying the spray guard needs to be done really correctly, because otherwise you go to the expense of the fiberglass or the bamboo rock, the expense of putting the guard around it, and then with the next big wind the bloody thing blows away. So
we're going to use we are using mahogany stakes because we can staple the guard to them, so they're sturdy and they won't blow away, because it is an exposed site. But it's going to be interesting to see how they go.
Yes. So there's a little bit of discontent within Oak New Zealand, because I'm the treasurer, and we got not much money, and we provide free consultancy services to Pamel. So all the advice on these 33 varieties comes from Catherine Heur and Eric Cairns, and some of the seedlings actually were coming from us as well. So in due time we would like to have a talk with Gordon Williams and show us the money. Because there is only that much you can do as a volunteer. Just to explain that next week there is the first AGM of Tane's Tree Trust in attendance with farm foresters. Tane's Tree Trust has got $5 million at the moment, to undertake a huge number of jobs. And here we farm foresters, here we are, we're doing things for free. Barry was for free, John here was for free, I don't charge. So at some stage, those services need to be paid for.
For sure. Yeah, I agree.
Just a general question. Judging the erosion problems on the east coast, do we know much about the root structures of oaks as far as holding beings? Different oaks?
Yeah, that might be Mike, but Barry has got a good photo of Paul Ditchen's hill.
Yeah, there was a few oaks we planted there on a steep face. Maybe one day we'll take you out, Mike, and show you. Paul, post Vola and post Gabriel, this hill slip, sort of mid-slope failure, but there were some 4 or 5 year old oaks on there, and they seem to have held up. There was just toppled over and the like. So, don't know.
What's Tairāwhiti like? Peter used to drop acorns down the cracks and the erosion and that, didn't he? What happened? Is that anything come of that?
No, I really wouldn't know, Nick.
Yeah.
An awful lot of them grew and fed the local deer, but some survived.
Yeah. I mean, they've been around for a while now, and dropped down the cracks of erosion. So.
Yeah. No, there's some good big ones. Moving cut.
Yeah.
You owners up there.
Yes. Yeah.
Anything might happen.
So the characteristic which you probably should be looking at or for is when these trees actually bind their roots underground and sort of literally form a
sense map. And I know they've discovered one or two natives that are doing that now. And it may be that they're different varieties if their tailor works together. But that's only not going to help much with the East Coast because the strips are much deeper than the surface that we're looking at the moment.
Are you talking about roots overlapping or fusing?
I think they bind, I'm not too sure the detail, but they bind together literally.
Meshing rather than
fusing.
I don't think they, well we know they communicate between
yeah.
The carnic is the only one that fuses. It does actually.
Yeah. Is that one?
Carnival.
Right.
Any other questions?
Is there a end use prospect for what the oaks, you know, potentially timber? We're talking 40, 50 years at least, but what's the anticipated result?
People have been talking about wine barrels, but I think that is looking forward a little bit too far. But oak is generally one of the best construction timbers in Europe. The Viking ships were all made of oak. The oaks were available throughout Europe and throughout the US, and it was a shipbuilding material. And houses, construction.
So nothing specific in terms of, it's just the prospect of timber and industry.
I think if you have your eyes open for cafeterias and restaurants, 80% of the tables is oak. And I don't know which variety, but you can recognize an oak. Yeah, so it's very accepted timber.
Oh, not going there. I was just being. It's not an industry currently in New Zealand, really.
No, but that is why it is exciting
Yeah.
to have an organization like PAMU on board.
Yeah.
Because if you connect that with the industry transformation plan that says we need more local sawmill processes, and then you're getting somewhere.
I had an interesting experience. We had a pin oak got blown through my house when our railway lightened up, which I had milled. And the guy who collected it, who's a very local miller, first of all, it smashed his truck. And then he literally couldn't saw it because he had to change the blade and things all the time. I think it was much of a circular saw. I've still got the wood there, but it's not even. It goes. Just couldn't cut straight lines.
Yeah, it's a recognised pin oak is not worth milling. It's good
You
fibre.
wouldn't want
It apparently delaminates, like an onion.
But he literally couldn't mill it.
Yeah.
It was a real challenge.
So
But
it's
I mean,
good,
you
it's
don't
good
know,
fibre.
but every variety would have to be analysed for these characteristics, right?
That's where I was going really. Because, Brian probably knows. You probably explored some of them.
I've milled 2 oak trees.
Yeah.
One was a total disaster. I don't know what sort it was. The other one wasn't too bad.
Yeah.
Quite nice timber.
Well, many years ago we took out, my grandfather planted double row of avenue of oaks leading up to his house. He planted them in 1905, 1906, and they were gradually thinned out until about 30 years ago. They were still too close together. They were about English oak, 4 or 5 metres apart, and they were competing with each other. So we took alternative trees out. Had a group of arborists. Were you there?
I did them.
You was there.
Yeah.
Okay, so these very skilled arborists deconstructed these trees without damaging the neighbours, and left me with 7 or 8 good mill logs, absolutely straight, very minimal branching. Prior to cutting these out, I'd approached Tairāwhiti joinery and a couple of other joiners in Gisborne, told them what I would have available, what sizes did they want, and they said, oh, we'll take all you can give us. So we milled them into a variety of sizes, and when they dried 12 months, 18 months later, I was able to take that into the various joiners, and what I received from them covered the cost of the arborist, the cost of the milling.
I see.
And left me with half the timber.
Yeah.
And they were used for, I know one went into a kitchen at Wainui, another one went to redoing a house at Wairoa, so it's very good timber.
Yeah.
This is English oak,
Yeah.
80 years old.
Yeah.
It was as straight as a die. I've been using some recently for this sort of work. Beautiful timber,
Yeah.
hard as anything.
Yeah.
So, you know, if you've got the right machinery, it's really, you know, it's worth having.
So those who were at Knapdale yesterday, the doors that you came through, that was all oak, and that 50, 60 mil solid timber. Our lintels is all oak. It came from Otoko, and Nigel Ferrum,
yeah.
you know, so, and they got a quarter sawn by J&L, and he painted the ends so it didn't crack. Now, I've forgotten what I paid for it, but I just said, oh, I want oak.
I've got oak tongue and groove flooring in my
yes,
home.
yes,
Father put together.
yes.
So there's another use.
Yes.
Good flooring.
Good flooring, yeah. Yes, yes. And we've used sapwood as well, and yeah, it's quite striking. But you know, the hardwood versus the sapwood, and it's outside, you know, a front door. And put some oil on it from time to time.
But all this information does need to be collated and put together as a resource so that people can understand what the future looks like.
So what you need to do is, if you're not a member like you of farm forestry, then you need to sign up,
Yeah.
and also to Oak New Zealand, and we have a Facebook page, and that is our main mode of communication. The website, we have information on the NZFFA website, but the Facebook page is more important to us. We've got quite a strong international following, and it is possible that next year the International Dendrological Society, yeah, that they're coming here? No? It's not?
No, they were due to come next month, when they'll be in New Zealand next month, for a month, about 40 of them. I was in touch with the person who's leading it last week. When Cyclone Gabriel hit,
Yeah.
our roads here were
Yeah.
out, and we had to call off this segment. Now, I wrote to her last week to say, well, thank goodness we called it off, because you couldn't get to Hack Falls, and Hack Falls was one of the main reasons
Yeah.
for coming to Gisborne East Coast.
Yeah.
Eastwoodhill and Hack Falls.
Yeah.
And 6 months ago, I thought we'd have no trouble getting there, but no. So they're not coming to this set.
Okay.
So the extra time they're spending is at they're spending a longer time with Sion in Rotorua, and the woman who's organising it is Lady Diana Rowlands, who originally is from Waverley. She was at Dickey, and I said, take very great interest in Dickey forestry, because what's happened here on the east coast with commercial forestry, blanket planting of single species forestry, needs to be re-looked at, and they have set aside half a day in Rotorua with Sion and various other people, and including somebody from one of her cousins from the Dickey forestry operation, looking at that.
Mm-hmm.
And I wish I could be there.
Yeah. Yes.
Say
yes.
what needs to be said.
So,
Okay, will we go into our vehicles and
No.
no?
See, we're
Okay.
all comfortable here. I'll give you a little bit of history
Sure.
here, and then we'll go down
Yeah.
and look at what we've done. So,
Sit up here.
stand up here. Okay, for those who don't know me, I'm Roger Faulkner. I've been involved here for many, many years. Eastwoodhill, in particular the Eastwoodhill Cathedral. Now, just over 100 years ago, Douglas Cook, who had set up Eastwoodhill, planted the trees, more or less led an unusual life, planting trees on good farmland. He and his wife did a trip to England. This would be in the late 1920s. When he came back, of course, when they were in England, they looked at all the stately homes and the gardens and the nurseries and the cathedrals and the museums and the whole 9 yards. And when he came back, he decided he would plant his own cathedral. Now, there was no board. He didn't have to get a permit from the council or anything. This was his own garden. He could do what he jolly well liked. So just over here, and many of you will have been there, just over here, he levelled off a knob that's probably as large as from those trees over there to here. Not a very big space. And with a horse and scoop and a wheelbarrow, he levelled off this knob and then planted a square, a cross shape, a cathedral shape, using eucalypts as the main uprights and conifers around the outside to create the wall. Now that sort of, they grew, and the trees that were on the best ground grew well, the trees that were on the worst ground died. So you had a very uneven growth of trees, as you can imagine. Nothing much was done there. Douglas Cook wasn't religious at all, but here was a quirky thing. He had quite an imagination. Here was a quirky thing that he could do. Now, nothing much happened there. Douglas Cook died, the board took over here, and about 40 years ago we had a curator here who was interested in the history of Eastwoodhill, and he discovered that over here there was this cathedral. So he got in with a chainsaw and the PD workers, and they cleared the space, and they discovered opened up the area and released, if you like, the cathedral shape. That was really quite exciting. None of us knew what it was in detail, but once it had been opened up, you could see what was there. And that was fine. And then one or two people went down there and they said, well, this would be a great place to get married. And okay, so that happened sort of rather surreptitiously. Nothing was official. The only regulation I think we put on was no confetti. You can imagine confetti in amongst leaves. It's not a good mix. So that was fine. There were various ceremonies held down there. There was a space double the size of, about double the size of what we've got here. So enough room for 40 or 50 people to gather. But nothing was done in the way of putting any construction or anything, and so that cathedral there became, well, I suppose it became better known. As we took bus groups around, we'd stop and discuss the cathedral, and we'd take walking groups through it, and it really sort of tickled the imagination of a lot of our visitors. So when the master plan was drawn up by Thomas Walt's associates in America in 2010, quite a lengthy document it is. It's a plan for the next 100 years, theoretically. And when that was drawn up, a key part of that was the development of the Eastwoodhill Cathedral. Now they state there that here is a space for the public to use for significant events. In 2014, we set up a small subcommittee to do the work down there, and that's what we're going to go down and have a look at. But I just wanted to give a bit of background to the old cathedral, how that led to what we've got down here, how what we've got down here has been based on the knowledge that has been gained from over here. In other words, the site wasn't ideal, the site wasn't big enough, the site couldn't accommodate a reception area alongside it, there was no suitable parking, and the ground was never going to be good enough. So what we'll do, I think we'll drive down to the cathedral, and then we'll have a look at what is down there, and have a look at what should be done as far as the management over the next 100 years goes. Is that okay?
Rodney, tell them about Westminster Cathedral.
What?
Tell them how big it is, Westminster Cathedral.
The cathedral down there, what we're going down to, the ground plan is the same size as Westminster Abbey. In other words, it's 170 metres long, 72 metres wide. So it fits perfectly. The best strain that David Clark has got, particularly even growth. Letter Sequoia came from Appleton's, as did the Tilia around the outside. Now, just beyond here, we've got two little chapel spaces. They are surrounded by ginkgo, and they're male ginkgo, so there shouldn't be a problem there. Now, the idea of those is that if there's a gathering, say there's a family wedding or a memorial or something, they provide a space sufficiently compact for a family group of maybe 50 or 60 people. Eventually, it was hoped that there'd be a bridge. Still hope there'd be a bridge across there. There's a very good site for a bridge. Anybody comes up with $100,000, and it might go ahead. But after Cave Creek, anything like that is expensive. So the bridge may or may not happen. But when it comes to a wedding in a place like this, you need somewhere for a reception. Now, at the moment, it seems as if they use the top lawn for wedding receptions, and that's not a great place, right in front of the curator's house. So there's a site over here on the other side of the creek at the foot of the hill where there's water and power, and we had a big marquee for the centennial in 2010. It's a perfect site, there's plenty of parking, so you could have the ceremony here, you could have the reception there, and apart from one or two neighbours across the road, they can make as much noise as they like. Now one of the, I suppose the important parts of having a space like this is to encourage the public to make use of Eastwoodhill. Now, for many years I was a marriage celebrant, and I would take weddings in people's gardens or their homes or wherever, but not many people have got a garden that's big enough to take a wedding. So a lot of the weddings I took were at the botanical gardens, and there's a little area there where there's a grove of trees. You can get in amongst them, and it's as far as a site goes, it was not too bad. But I think if we can encourage, if the board can encourage people to have weddings up here or little family gatherings, we'll get more and more people develop an ownership, a feeling of respect for Eastwoodhill. Now that has got all sorts of positive implications. And you think of somebody having a wedding here, and 10 years later they'll come back to their children. They'll have a little memorial here. Sarah and I were up here a few months ago. We brought our picnic, set our table up at the end there. We didn't consult the bishop or anything, and we sat at the Holy of Holies and had a picnic. And there was another couple up here doing the same thing. Now, that is the sort of thing that we really hope will happen here, that people will use this space and develop an affinity for it and an ownership, and eventually they might put their hands in their pocket and say, well look, here's a wonderful legacy that I can help the future with. Now, when I retired from the board 10 years ago or so, the Friends of Eastwoodhill had a membership of over 1,000, and that was growing all the time. Now, all of those people support Eastwoodhill because they believe in Eastwoodhill. They believe in the philosophy, they believe in the work that's done up here. And they're the ones who will, if there's volunteers needed to look after a cruise ship comes up here, or work to be done, they're the ones who will assist with that. And I think that group of people who are supporters of Eastwoodhill, the more they can be encouraged to make use of places like this, the better. Now, we need to look this area we're in. These trees were planted 2014, 15. They're getting to the point where you can see, you can get the impact of what they are like, what they, and with a bit of imagination you can see what they will look like in the future. Now, these are going to grow. Unlike a bricks and mortar cathedral, every year these are going to grow. Now, these redwoods are going to be pruned up eventually, so long as somebody doesn't become too carried away and take the top out. But as they're pruned up, you'll notice the light coming in from the side. So winter light will come, winter sun will come into the middle, and eventually the crown will meet at the top. So in the summer it'll be beautifully shaded. The debate now is whether we should take out half of the trees, take out every other tree, or whether we should leave them to create the atmosphere and create what I would consider opportunities for the future. So what I'd like to hear would be your views on that. Do we leave them? Do we leave it as it is? Do we take alternate trees out? Now we've got to make that decision. It's got to be made. And the sooner it's made, the better. Because if it's not made, some well-meaning person will come in and say, "Oh, I think we need to take half of them out." End of discussion. Or, we've got the situation now where the curator of Eastwoodhill or the manager of Eastwoodhill, they seem to be changing every year, and we need a management plan stuck in the office up there that every new curator or whoever he is knows what the intention is for this area. So, Marcus.
Thank you, Robbie. That's a big introduction. The issue that I think was overlooked when this was designed is that redwoods don't stop growing. They get very big, and there's one up at the top there. It's about 100 years old, at 2.25 metres through the trunk at 100 years. Now, if you can begin, and that's only at 100. And obviously, this is a very long-term project. If you can even imagine what a 2-metre trunks look like down this avenue now, forget about what goes over the top. I think we're looking at a place which was not going to be nearly as inviting as relatively open spaces with light and other trees, because one of the intentions was to have other trees around here that provide colour and, you know, a nice warm atmosphere. And I've got a little printout of one of the big trees in California, which has got a great big Chevy truck parked in the middle of it. And that tree is I think it's 21 feet at the base from side to side. Now, that won't happen in our lifetime or the next lifetime, but that's the sort of thing we're looking at with these trees in particular. I don't have anything, in fact, I don't have anything against the redwoods. I've traded under the name of sequoia most of my life. But I think we've got to make a decision now, and so that we know what the long-term implications will be. Because we don't want to have people coming along when these trees are 100 feet high or more, and then trying to take them out. A, it'll be a real challenge, and B, it'll leave a bit of a mess as well. So, and it's a bit misleading looking at these trees. They're only about 8 years old at the moment. They seem to be growing quite well. But in 80 years' time, it won't look anything like this. And look, they're nearly meeting already, their branches at this age. And I have got I've got a printout of a couple of photographs to do in the car of David Clark's planting. It's like literally going into a dungeon. And those trees, even though they've been pruned to 30 feet, it's not the sort of thing that creates that warm, inviting space. So that I think is the real point of this exercise. I've got redwood growing at several I planted a few years ago, 50 years old. They're over 100 feet high. So they do grow, not particularly fast, but they don't stop growing, both ways.
I have a question for Rodney. So they were international renowned landscape architects who came up with this plan. So we got the plan here, but there was no work plan for the future.
Nope.
Right.
Nope. Just to take that back a wee bit, Case, the original plan we had from the landscape architects was to use London plane throughout as the main tree. Now that was about 2010. He was talking about that. I did a bit of research on that and discovered that the London plane suffers from a very serious branch disorder, and it's only just become evident. And in the south of France, where a lot of the canals and roads have got avenues of plane, branches are starting to fall off. In London, where you've got these beautiful big plane trees in the streets, branches from way up are falling off. Now that's not what you want in a space like this.
Yeah.
So we did away with that, and the next choice was the sequoia.
We went for the sequoia, and I think what they did is they just replaced the sequoia. Replaced the plane trees.
Yep.
They didn't think about the consequences of that. And now that we have that opportunity, we know what is going to happen. We need to plan accordingly, and I think we need to start taking action even literally now. Certainly to get the plan sorted out.
Rodney, I've got a question. Case here. Case has been doing a lot of measuring on sequoia in the last few years, and we're looking at these trees here at say 50 years of age and 100 years of age, what's the expectation of breast height, diameter, based on these things? 50 years and 100 years.
Personally, I would say that as a growth indicator, that these ones would sit below the 50%. Yeah. As far as growth goes, I wouldn't say that these are outstanding trees. They look beautiful, but they're not matching the site at David Clark's. That's one observation. My second observation is you would be at least another 10 years away before the trees start interfering with each other, you know, the branches. And my third observation is you were heading a subcommittee or a small committee in 2012, 2016, 18, and I think a decision like that could be influenced by a new committee. But I don't know whether the board is concerned about this, Nick?
I'm a bit new on the ground to know, as to the general consensus on that. Yeah, I've got my own view, but...
Yes. But I think it's a far-reaching decision to start taking trees out from an original plan. It needs to be researched.
What is your final pruning height here?
There's no such thing as a final pruning height or final growth, I'm afraid. These are going to keep growing for years. Yes. My feeling is that these will be pruned up. They could be pruned up to 20 metres. You know, there'll be very tall columns. The big danger is some over-enthusiastic person climbing up and taking too much off. But you've got the most perfect site for managing trees here. It's flat, it's well drained, alongside a road. All it needs is somebody in here with a hydro ladder and chainsaw, just work along, work up. So they can be managed, and I don't think there's a limit on how high that pruning will be. The important thing is that
you look at it now, you've got a triangle where the bottom branches are actually extending by about 3 meters beyond at the moment.
Yeah.
So what kind of shape do you foresee in the future?
Well, sooner or later those branches are going to be touching.
They're pinnacles, so they'll get to 5-6 metres in no time at all. Branches on these. And but I see we've got a double leader there which needs to be dealt with already.
Just by way of an introduction, I'm Garrett. I'm the General Manager, the new one, at Eastwoodhill. I just want to answer the gentleman's question over there in regards to the board and this sort of issue. What we're thinking is we need to develop a plan around this space and how we can approach it from a scientific point of view. It hasn't come across the board yet, but we are going to, I am going to put that in front of them to understand the gravity of the situation that we have here. So it's definitely on their radar for sure.
Well, if the decision was made to cut every second one, being a coppicing species, you would have to, I imagine, poison so they don't keep coming back. So you would have to, I assume, do it before they start root grafting? And then that...
Yeah, the Simon Rapley, when I bought my redwood off, said that you can kill, to prevent the coppicing, you can, because they root graft, you can't use poison that'll turn to attack the neighbour. He said if you sprinkle superphosphate around the cambium layer of the freshly cut stump, it'll kill most of them. And it doesn't matter if some superphosphate gets through to the neighbour. But how good that is, I don't know.
Well, and these are cut off, you can mow over them. Really.
Yeah, but they coppice very vigorously.
You sort of, you imagine a stump that diameter, root, stump ground down to below ground level, and every time the area is mown, anything that comes up will be chopped off. So I don't think that's a major problem.
I think it'd be worthwhile trying. I've no idea how valid that is, but that's what Simon Rapley told me.
Yeah, but it may not be a problem here, because I would imagine if a large tree is taken out here, and it's stump ground, the whole lot will be, that'll be mown, and you won't, 12 months later, you won't know it was there. But
but how do you fell a large tree?
how do you fell a large tree? You've got very good arborists now who can climb to the top. They can.
That's if you have to drop them. You have to, as in section them down.
Yeah,
but these have got probably 25, 30 years, and you can still get them down without that. Just diagonally through. So I don't understand there'd be any urgency to take anything out for some considerable time. That's my point. I mean, that's where I go. And if you had a strategy that said when the branches are touching, that you pruned up to a certain height below that, so that you always understand where you need to be in your pruning, in order that the damage isn't, that they're not going to be damaging each other with taking the tops out and things, then that you don't know what that time frame is, but you know that you have to deal with it according to a strategy.
See, I see an opportunity if you're going to take these trees out to put other smaller shrubs or smaller trees which provide colour, light and a different environment.
Isn't that what is around the outside? Isn't that?
Yeah, but we're talking about a space that people want to be in, as in a cathedral or a church or celebrating. And I could envisage, for example, Anzac services and things like that being around here, big community events, celebrations. And to me, it's important to create a space because we're right bang in the middle of the whole church as it is here. This is the crossbeam. We've got the two little chapels on each side. If that space wants to be open and warm and inviting, and not covered with a massive canopy and darkness, or a solid wall of timber.
But you get it partly through the high pruning as well.
Yeah, but you'll still have that solid canopy above that because you're not going to high prune more than what, at best 50% of the height of the tree oak.
Marcus, isn't that the purpose of the cathedral?
Yeah.
That's the whole purpose of the cathedral.
To what?
To have a beautiful canopy like that over the top. I know they're darker trees than the original planes with the columns, but that's the whole purpose.
No, I don't think you want a canopy over the top. I think you want to create that space.
Okay.
The canopy is a roof, and then I define it as a dungeon, especially when you've got redwoods, because they literally close everything.
They are a bit dark, yes, but they'll be pruned right up always.
It's not a forest, though. I think that's compare this
to
not
a forest, but
David Clark's.
there are a lot of trees here.
You've got 2 rows of trees. And so you always, especially in winter, you are going to get the side lights.
These are cross. They'll even potentially cross.
But you've got
in
David, you have 2 rows in here plus endless rows out either side, and you haven't got that here. So it's a very different situation to the space and the up top.
Yeah, because this is a tree cathedral. It's not stunning redwood trees. It's a tree cathedral, yes, in my opinion.
Yes, I think so.
Rodney, that plan that you've had, could we not go back and bring the same, that chap still associates with New Zealand, doesn't he, that architect?
Yes, he comes here often.
It's here quite often.
That's a plan. We are going to go back to
so
Thomas
get some
Watts.
input from there.
Yeah.
Because, I see it, if you're going here, you could go like this for 50 years without giving yourself a problem. It's about 50 a year.
Just lifting. Just lifting the branches.
Yeah, just quietly lifting the branches as you go. I think the biggest issue was, at this stage, is trying to keep those double leaders out. Because you don't really want double leaders in here if you can help it at this stage. And
As far as the light goes, you know, it's going to be a lot of light. That attracts a vastly different view when you get inside this forest. Yeah. I see these trees as not a potential liability, but as a potential asset. And if, as Donald explained, they are removed, if some of them are removed at the age of 30 or 40 when they're big, minimal trees, physically that's not a big job for a qualified arborist. They can be dismantled from the top down. The saw logs can be milled at a portable mill here right on the site. But the real advantage, that timber has got a connection, hopefully, with people who've been married here, who've had little ceremonies here. You imagine the appeal. If you remember the Friends of Eastwoodhill, you've supported Eastwoodhill for all your life, as Marcus has and I have and many others have. If I could, not to put too fine a point on it, but I'll be needing a coffin in the next few years. If I could go out with a coffin made of Eastwoodhill redwood from the Eastwoodhill Cathedral, I'd far rather do that than go out in one of these chipboard coffins.
Then you'll burn it. Go to ash.
That'd be my problem. Linda.
Don't they have computer programs? They got them for kitchen design, they got them for house architecture and stuff. And instead of talking about what might happen here, couldn't you just get put it in a computer and say, okay, this is the growth rate, this is what that tree does, and put it in and see this is how much light comes in? I mean, surely, I'm sure that they have programs like that. Or architects who know how to do that. And so then the discussion can go to another level of this is what's going to happen if you do this is what's going to happen, and then see, it sounds to me like there's another underlying issue is what is the vision of what this place means and what it should look like. Those are two separate, like what it's going to do and what it means and what it's going to look like. Those are two separate points to be discussed.
And what it will mean to individual people, which is probably...
Well, no, I mean that's an intangible, yeah. but the tangible, what these trees are really going to do and how much light's really going to come in and what it's going to look and feel like, that can be computer. You can do a computer image on that.
Well, this is what Case is doing. He's doing regular measurements of redwood groups all around the North Island.
That's the data, and you have the program to be able to do the light is coming in this much there, and an architecture program.
The growth models for redwood would not apply to these trees because we're measuring trees in a forest situation, and this is not a forest. So, but there is no reason why we can't start taking regular measurements. But this is quite a nice environment to work in.
Do forestry people have models where they can say this is going to look like that? I mean, you do it for gardening, you do it for kitchen design, you do it for architecture, you do it in forestry. Then you have better data to discuss what is really going to happen, and then the discussion is really about what it all means and what the vision is.
You could feed the same thing is you could feed growth scenarios into the likes of an architecture program, and you would see at the times of the day what sunlight would shine in, where the shadows are cast and all of that. That's what a lot of those programs would allow you to do, of which you would use measurements to inform you on what scenario to put in. But then you could get, based on what scenarios you put in, you would be able to picture the times of the day and the shadows cast and all that sort of thing.
And I think you're also then talking about future modelling, so what does that look like in 10 years or 20 years or 30 years, and although it's based on the data, it's not necessarily 100% accurate, but you could get a really good idea of what we could be dealing with the trees in place, without the trees in place, and that can inform a conscious decision, because there's a lot of work I think to go into informing that decision. It's not necessarily when we make a round the table in the next 2 to 3 weeks, I think there needs to be a lot of careful thought, consideration, and scientific backing to inform that, and that's kind of where I'm coming in at. But they might not be the exact trees.
I have two further remarks, and I look forward to hearing Rob's opinion. I think you need to prune very quickly, so I would say before Christmas, and even just take a meter off, but these branches are getting bigger and bigger, and the sooner you deal with it, the better. The second remark I have is I just came back from Skyline, the luge in Rotorua. Redwoods were planted in 1984, so they are over 40 years old, and they are spending significant money on taking the trees that they want to take out, they take them out the way that Donald was explaining. They climb them, they take the branches off, and then...
That for them, it wouldn't be here. In terms of, if you wouldn't wait until that point ideally, but if you've got to that point and you made that decision, it's a
then it
doable
can
thing.
still happen.
Yeah, but they're having to do that, and that's why, because there are people around them.
And they're doing it for the same reason that we want these trees high pruned. They're doing it for the atmosphere.
Yeah.
They want the people on the luge to see into the forest rather looking at a wall of greenery. And they're pruning to 14, 16 meters.
So are they taking a millable log out? Is that part of it or not?
Yeah, they have 2.5 meter logs coming down. Yeah.
If you have a look at the value of redwood timber in New Zealand, I was absolutely blown away. I was looking for clear New Zealand grown redwood, a 4 metre length of 80 mil thick, 850 wide by 4 metres long, $1,800. And they were not.
Was that heartwood?
Well, that would be from one side of the log to the other.
The whole log.
So, eh?
The whole
Yeah,
log.
but
A flitch.
Did it include sapwood?
No, not much sapwood.
No.
It was a bit, it was a bit like those tables you've made.
Yes.
You got a bit of
You didn't buy it.
outside sapwood.
And it was clear, was it?
No, it had not. So,
that's
if we're looking to retain trees here that will have a potential value in years to come, I think we've got to bring that value into the computation we do. I hear what Linda has to say. We can look at a computer and see where the light will shine, see how much shading there is. But we've got the human value to come in. We've got the value of the atmosphere of a space. And we've got a very unusual... What we've done here has never been done anywhere else in New Zealand, probably not anywhere else in the world. Now, even if you're not a religious person, this space has got a significance. Now, if somebody gets married here or they have a memorial service, they will have a connection with this space. If a tree is taken out at a particular time, it is milled, that timber will have an appeal to people who have got an appeal to this particular place. Now, whether it's a redwood dining table made from the trees of the Eastwoodhill Cathedral, whether it's a coffin, whatever it is, I think we've got to look at that connection with the people who become associated with this place, and with the potential, if the trees are left to a point where they will produce millable timber.
We did have the site blessing before we planted the trees, and we had multiple religions came and all contributed to that blessing. So we tried to make it encompassing, not just Christians, but encourage other people to come as well.
I think key, case, that's, I mean, to me, pruning's the only decision that needs doing now.
Yes.
Anything else, there is no rush whatsoever. We've got heaps of time to make a good decision. But yeah, in my view, pruning wants to be done, you know, small but often, and I'd say it's fairly urgent to do some now. But other than that, there is no urgency.
No, I totally agree. Yep. And if you knew the point where you need to do pruning, that's, you know, you'd have a regime built around that.
Just another question. What about the other trees outside the redwoods? What's the management for the other trees outside the redwoods?
Well, these are the outside. You've got Tairāwhiti philo.
Yep.
The broadleaf lime.
Yep.
And I've got them growing at Muriwai, and after 40 years, they wouldn't be as tall as these redwoods.
Right.
So they're the understory.
Yep.
The deciduous wall.
Yep.
Here you've got the ginkgo, and up here you've got the metasequoia and the maples.
Would you take out some of the side branches fairly soon, so you get them up to maybe yay height, 6 foot or something?
They're not terribly even. I notice there's one missing over here that'll have to be replaced. I don't think it's the sort of thing that needs pruning up, but that's a decision for the board.
You want to discuss the plane trees?
Oh yeah, when we created the site, there were plane trees right along there. We took the ones out that were going to interfere with the planting. The idea was that those ones up there, eventually they'll have to come out. They could probably do with a bit of arbor care at the moment. They're starting to affect the trees at the top end. So I think that's an arborist job. They have an annual arborist come to Eastwoodhill, and I think that's one of those little jobs that the curator needs to keep an eye on. That'll be your job, Nick. Hurry them along. But they do need attention.
You could easily whack them back a bit for a start, couldn't you? You know, rather than removing something.
Yeah.
Well, they've been whacked back a little bit already. You might find an alternative. The Trichocarpopoplar is one that appeals to me because it's the tallest deciduous tree, and it's a pinnacle shape as well. So we could look at them around the outside at a distance rather than interfering with the structure we've got here.
First, I want to ask a question. Do I need to go over the issue of why we need to plant for bees, or is everybody aware enough that the beekeeping industry is really, there's serious threats now with varroa and starvation, with overcrowding of the bees, and along with the starvation comes increased problems with the diseases and the varroa. I mean, sick, poorly nourished bees can't cope with varroa or any other viruses or anything very well. So our bee health is at issue. And I didn't want to really spend very much time talking about it because I think everybody pretty much knows about it. So I'll go right into, we've been working for about 12, 13 years, and we were here at Eastwoodhill for 2 years. In 2012, 13, 14, and spent full-time researching here. So the culmination of all those years of research is one of the culminations is our handbook for planting. This is, you can download it on the internet. It's online, and this is another recent one. These are our most recent, but we've got others, and I'll talk at the end of my talk about that. So it's dire. I'm very worried about the bees because that means pollination services, and if you're talking about poor pollination services or expensive pollination services, we're influencing New Zealand's horticulture industry that relies on pollination by honeybees. So the bee plant finder tool was one of our many results of all this research, and it was an attempt to try to make it real easy for people to just, when people say, well, what am I going to plant for bees, you can read the handbook and find out how to do it, but you can just say you want any specific kind of a situation or a specific kind of a plant, then hopefully you can plug into this and find the good bee plants. So I'm going to introduce the tool, and then I'm going to talk a little bit about how to use the tool, and then I'm going to show some resources for making a planting plan, and then I will go online and we'll use the tool and play with it. And then I'd like to ask people what else. We're going to be doing a second edition of the tool, hopefully, and I want to know from you guys what you think would be good to put in the tool in the future. So our database contents are, out of about 400 or 500, like did I do something? Worldwide.
That's a building creaky.
Oh, really? Okay. Worldwide, there's thousands and, hundreds, many, many, many thousands of good bee plants. And my first search through all the literature of the international was thousands. And then I boiled it down. Barry was a participant. I had the beekeepers look at all those lists. And we figured out which ones were in New Zealand and which ones were the good bee plants. So we surveyed beekeepers, and then we went out in the field and did 10 years of research. And then we came down, we boiled it down to our top 222 good bee forage plants, and they're all in the database. And we have measured 12 attributes of each plant, the most important attributes for which we have complete data. I'll explain that in a little bit. And then we had to, sadly, exclude all the weeds that are on the National Plant Pest Accord, and it will get really, really good bee plants, but we can't promote them. We can talk about them on the side, but we can't promote them. And
define a weed?
Sorry?
How do you define a weed?
National Plant Pest Accord says you can't have it, number one.
What is it?
Weed busters, I'm not going to define it. Weed buster, it's whatever somebody doesn't want, wherever it is that they don't want it. And I have people, when I started working at Landcare, they said all exotic plants are weeds. And I had to learn when I worked with the beekeepers, no. There's a lot of very important plants that they are not that weedy, and we need them. So I'm not going to define a weed. I'm never going to define a weed. I'm going to say that this authority and that authority said it's a weed and we can't have it. That's all I do. So the data sources are the 12 years of field observations. We're running around here looking at tree bees in the flowers and getting data. And then Angus McPherson, who's very important in our project, planted about 34 demonstration bee plantations, including 3 with Barry and all in Gisborne, Canterbury, all over. So we actually planted what we said were good bee plants. And then I searched the literature quite thoroughly. So the types of features that we had to do, the constraint we had was that for our first edition of the program, I didn't want to get into long, involved, very expensive de novo programming for a thing. So we just jumped onto Lucid, which is a plant identification tool, and we're using as a plant list tool to create a list for us of plants. So there was a constraint on it that every feature, every attribute that we did had to have data for everything, right? All our plants. So if we didn't have the data for all the plants, we couldn't put it in. So I'll show you that in the next section. But so the bee related features, they're a little bit difficult to do because they're a little bit subjective. It's very difficult to do quantitative measures for how attractive it is or how good it is for bees. So here's how you use the tool. Okay, so using the tool, you prioritize the most important feature that is your most important feature, and then you select other features as you need. And then you explore the options by fooling around with it. With, what if we do this? What do we do that? With, take these features out, put these features in. And it comes in 4 quadrants, where you have your feature states here that you're going to select, and you have your entities, the list of the bee plants there. And then when they're discarded, once you click on one of these, some of these will say, no, it doesn't have that feature. And this will show you the chosen features. I'll just demonstrate that. Okay, so supposing you have a spring pollen gap. You're a beekeeper, you have a spring pollen gap program, and you want to plant something, and the farmer said you can have this space to plant it. What are you going to plant? Well, so the first thing, and that was real. When we started Trees for Bees, the Canterbury beekeepers said to us, we don't have anything flowering after the willows finish flowering and before the clover starts. So in that gap, our populations go backwards. Can you do something? And that's where Eastwoodhill comes in. Yes, we can. So out of, and we found many, many plants here that are flowering during that October crash period, and there is no problem. The problem is the diversity on the farm. That's what the problem is. So you click on spring. It shows down here that you've selected spring flowering, and it shows out of the 222, you've got 177 plants to choose from. And it discarded these ones, they don't flower in the spring. So supposing you have an autumn problem, same problem, but it's in the autumn. So you will click on autumn, and you'll have 45, which goes to show we're still, after 10 years, searching for more autumn plants. It's very important in the autumn because the bees need to prepare for the winter. So in the flowering times, we've got 177 species that flower in the spring, and that's the most important for the bees. In the summer, we don't need to worry. We don't bother with things in the summer because there's so many things flowering in the summer, especially the natives, that you don't have to be planting for it. In the autumn, it's very difficult. To this day, it is very difficult, mainly because some of the good plants we found, they're not in the nursery trade. So now we got to do that, get over that hurdle. And in the winter, it depends on where you are. If you're in Invercargill, you can have a long winter, and you don't want winter plants. But maybe you're up in the north of the North Island, and you don't have a brood break, then you might want plants in the winter. So supposing you need a shelter belt, and you want to take care of the bees too. So decide how many rows of plants you want. Say you want 3 or something like that. The search on the life forms, so you want tall trees, short trees, and shrubs. And then for each row, choose the height. So you would do that in sequence. And here we have chosen spring flowering and tree, and we have 121 entities remaining. So the summary of the life forms, we've got 100 in the database. We have 150 trees, 87 shrubs, 10 herbaceous perennials, and then other plants that are just kind of tufted or climbers. And we've got crop plants in there because there's some situations where you want to, you've got some land and you need something that you want to get it to flower, then get it out. And brassica, phacelia, things like that. So you can mow it down when it's going to compete with whatever you want the bees to go to. But then, supposing you want to have just natives, and that happens a lot. There are 28 native plants that produce surplus honey. By that I mean that if those plants are what your bees are feeding on, you will get honey for you, and the honey that maintains the bee colony will have excess, surplus. So it's surplus above what the bees need to grow, and the beekeeper can take that. So 10 of the 12 monoflorals are native, and we got in the entire database, we got 65 natives and 146 exotics. So if we click on all that, we have 32 remaining that are trees, spring, and native. And so then you look at that and you start, so that then you can look at, okay, well, I've got a really wet site or a really dry site or a really wet, or it's just moist, the tolerances of your site. You can also select features for that. And what we're going to be seeing, oh, I'm sorry, that's covered up. at the end of our part 1 of our field trip, you will see the grand, majestic Alnus nitida. And the thing about that plant that amazes me, not only is it flowering in the autumn with copious, unbelievable amounts of pollen, it also tolerates, I just said one of the few plants that tolerate really wet and really, really dry. Most plants will just tolerate dry or moist, or wet or moist, but not wet and dry. And nitida is one of the few that can do that, so it's a fabulous plant. And then sun and shade, there's not a sun. Again, full sun, full shade. Between those two extremes, partial sun. And you'll get a combination of full sun or partial sun frequently, or partial sun and full shades frequently. But here's Trionomeles japonica, flowering quince, deep in the forest here at Eastwoodhill, and I couldn't believe my eyes. One lonely little shrub, and bees were buzzing around it. Out of all that they had at Eastwoodhill. I couldn't believe it. And then when Angus planted some up at the top on Ben and Anna's Wairoma, or whatever, their farm up the hill, Angus was planting that, and the bees came to it while he was planting it. So when you get something like that, you know you've got a good bee plant. So the next thing you do is confirm your choices. This tool is not meant for you to go, oh good, it said go do this. You now have to go, well, wait a minute. Let me go to my nursery guy and find out, you know, is this going to work? Or go to the regional council, the plant advisors, or go to experts, local experts, and find out, well, these are on my list that are candidates. What do you think? What grows well here? So it doesn't give you all the information, but it's to give you a suggestion for a candidate list. So there's many, many reasons for planting. If you download this book, you will see we've covered 10. There are more. I'm just talking to Marcus, and there's also forestry, and there's this and that. And I mean, there's many, many reasons for planting. Riparian, land stabilization, biodiversity, severe weather damage, livestock welfare, horticulture. So if you're trying to meet those needs, but at the same time help the bees. So you're doing multifunction planting. And funding, Angus has put together this list of all the places you can find funding depending on your circumstances. And these are all the resources we have on our online that you can download. If you're interested in riparian, we have a riparian planting book. We have a handbook for people that want to plant manuka. And we have this handbook, and we have this pollen analysis book for people that are interested in identifying pollen. And then our original, this one was the willow book, and a booklet. And the power of pollen profiles, how you do a pollen profile. And this was our very first guide to planting that Angus and I did. So that's it for the plant tool. The best book is this one, but I highly recommend looking at the riparian and the manuka, because we've got other information in terms of instructions on how to do the planning the bee forage budget. And we have wonderful sponsors. These are all SFF grants. And so now I think I'd like to get the Angus online and get the Bee Plant Finder online, and we can play around with it and see what you think. So you go Trees for Bees, information, online tools, and then our latest tool. There are other online tools. David Glennie did a New Zealand willow identification key. We have if you want to identify pollen, if you want to identify pollen, this is how you learn. And we have a pollen catalog where you can see the answers of what if you're trying to learn to key down, so you can learn it. And the Trees for Bees flower catalog is a work in progress. So we go down here. I've lost the. Okay, so it gets a little blah blah at the beginning, and then you run the key. Oh, and there's big instructions. It says do this, do that, but run the key, what you're going to get. Oh, I probably don't want to do that. Because I got to do, okay. So let's start. Somebody got a situation, they want to see what kind of plants, what kind of bee plants you could have for your situation? Don't give me one too hard. Like, don't choose winter flowering because there's hardly anything that's going to come up. You get to zero really fast.
Is Tairāwhiti on the list?
Yes?
Yeah.
Yeah. Have you got a site that you're thinking of?
No, I've got lots of Tairāwhiti. It's winter and sort of early spring.
Yeah,
So on.
and the importance of Tairāwhiti is that the bumblebees, that's what the queen bumblebees go on most to start their season.
Okay.
So you're going to have good bumblebees, and the honeybees rely on the bumblebees to open the flowers.
Okay.
Yeah, there are online, in our website, there's also, I've done 13 plants where I've done an in-depth analysis of how that plant serves the bees and what you can use the plant for.
And Tairāwhiti as well?
Yeah, Tairāwhiti is one of them. Oh, yeah. And so is
No, I was just hoping it
Elnis.
wasn't on the potential weed, because it's in places it gets away on people.
No, but you see, the thing is, we're kind of leaning towards what farmers say are a weed, which answers your question, Marcus, because, one of the first best plants we found was sycamore. You can't have it, it's a weed, and it's on the National Plant Pest Accord. So it's very regionalized, and you have to use your common sense and consult your regional council. Because if it's on your regional council list, our initial plant guides had regional council listing earmarked which ones the regional council said, no, please don't do this. So somebody want to start?
Sorry,
Yeah.
question. Some of your preferred species, you just got SPP. Do you gel down to like?
If it I forgot, when you go say, let's take Acer, okay? And we'll see some Acer on the field trip. Let's take Acer. There's the little plus sign. We studied we're going to see Trident Maple, Acer. I'm going to pronounce this correctly. This is, in case you're going to correct me. It's Bergerianum. Is that right? Bergerianum. It's named after a Dutch botanist, I think, but named Buer or something. Okay, and so you see, we have done all these maples. Most of them are here in Eastwoodhill, and we've got samples of them. So when I say Acer sput and there's a little cross, then you open it up and look there's all our Elnis and Astelia, and then this one, Banksia, doesn't have a bunch. The brassicas, we have a bunch. Let me see what else. Chalmers, Ceanothus, citrus. Eucalypts, we should work with NZ Forestry to get our eucalypt list. We don't have enough. I just have the ones that Angus knew about or I knew about, but we can...
Citrus is October flowering, isn't it?
Citrus, it depends. Limes are flowering now, but some of them are flowering in July. Depends on which citrus. Be very careful with the citrus. I wrote one of my fact sheets, the 13 plants that I did the deep analysis on. Citrus is tricky because anything when you're getting into the edible horticulture, you got to be really careful because a citrus like a Valencia orange, that's a cultivar, but a Valencia orange of a certain type has been bred to be sterile, absolutely no seeds. So if you have no seeds, you have no pollen. They breed out the reproductive parts of the flowers. So, yeah?
How does apple pollen compare with citrus pollen?
Well, I'd compare the whole flower. The apple flower has really good pollen. You mean really good pollen, but and quite a bit, and so does citrus. But citrus has nectar that the bees go nuts on. Yeah. And so the big benefit of citrus is the nectar. Yeah. But apple and pear are top bee plants.
Yeah. I've got some bees adjacent to a citrus orchard, 8 or 9 hectares of which have just been converted to apples. The bees are really going for the citrus, not so keen on the apples.
They're after the nectar.
Yeah.
That was an unfortunate choice to plant apples next to citrus. You have to be careful.
Well, that's not my problem.
Yeah, no, I'm just saying there's a lot to it. And sometimes other flowers attract the bees in and then they go to what you want, your crop. Other times, other flowers are a decoy. They detract.
One more question about apples. Does the apple flower produce much nectar, or is it mainly pollen?
No, it does produce good nectar, but it's not like a citrus.
Yeah.
I mean, I could get the little pipettes that I take for nectar. Citrus just easy. Apple, I have to work a little harder. Yeah. So let's just say we're going to do. We have, what was I doing before? Oh yeah, at Eastwoodhill we're going to plant. They're planting a wet site. So say we want to do wet soils. Okay, so I want to click on wet soils. Prefers wet soils. Click. And that says that down here tells me I've got wet soils. So I have 40 things to choose from, but that's a native site. So we want to go here and say we want native plants only. Okay, so you go down here and plant native or exotic. We only want the natives. We're down to 9 plants that you can plant. Or candidates that we recommend, let's say it that way. It's not, you can plant anything you want. And then, okay, so now I've got that. We want wet soils and we want native, but now I'm going to enhance it because these bee-related features that I haven't talked much about yet, it's a bit complicated. Let's see if we can really get good nectar. So I want to know which ones of those produce surplus honey and nectar. So let's click on that. That it provides that and that provides surplus honey stores in the hives. We're down to 5. So you would want for your candidates definitely flax, Metrosideros, Exerba tauri, but that Barry says you've got to worry about the altitude there, and Geonostoma rupestris, hangy, I'm not, anyway. Okay, so let's see if, is it 1:15 yet?
Yeah, we're getting there now, I think.
Because we'll bring Angus in, because, yeah, I mean, Angus really knows the hard questions about erosion and the site conditions. I don't know if I've explained it well enough. I think I listed there frost, thorniness, flooding, and things like that would be important, that you might want to say, hey, I've got a site that floods. I want something that's flood prone. We couldn't put flooding in here as a feature because we're constrained by the Lucid program. We couldn't find on the internet, with vast internet searches that Angus's IT person did, we couldn't find enough data on all of our all 222 plants that covered, does it tolerate flooding or not? And we weren't going to sit there and guess, so we had to take the feature out. This is the other half of the Trees for Bees field work. We also have palynologists working. This is Angus McPherson.
You might be able to see some of the people, Angus, there.
Okay, I can see the audience. Afternoon, hope you've been having a good time. Learning lots?
Yeah, it's been good. Excellent. We've just run through the bee plant finder tool. So it's Q&A now about it. And anything else anyone wants to raise. We've got 4 people from the Gisborne District Council here, and also Malcolm Rutherford's just come in not long ago from QE2 Trust, local rep. Excellent. So yeah, it's a good mix of people here today. So don't be shy if you've got a question for Angus.
If anybody has a question, could they answer it into the microphone?
Oh, I'll give this to them.
Yeah.
All right, I've got a question. So I'm Nicola. I have a little lifestyle blog. I'm a beekeeper and love planting trees. So during the last wet season, I've got a lot of slips, and of course, obviously, the riverbank has changed quite a bit. So I'm directly by the river, and so I'm looking for other solutions than just planting out willows and poplars on the property. I've planted a lot of natives over the last 8 years, but I'm also grazing the land. So I try to stabilize the land as well as try to keep livestock on the property in some areas. That's why I'm here.
Yeah, it's an interesting challenge. I mean, it's one level. It's hard to go past your willows at one level in terms of bank stabilisation, but it's also important to acknowledge that a lot of the willows that have been planted historically, they're a larger tree, and with things like the cracked willow, they break, and they're a weed problem. There are alternatives there with shrub and osseous willows that only grow to about 3 or 4 metres high. You can cut them back regularly. You can actually use them as stock feed in the dry season, and it provides you with that really good spring build-up pollen. So if you haven't had a look at it, look at our Winning with Willows handbook, because there's actually quite a wide variety of species available there. Natives like Tairāwhiti provide very good deep rooting. The issue you have there is, of course, is protection from stock if you're still grazing there. I mean, an advantage with your willows and poplars is you can just put a pole in there and a sleeve around it, and it's okay with sheep in the short term and cattle after sort of 2 or 3 years. So it's just finding that balance there, but also thinking of it in terms of your riparian planting zones and making sure that what's closest to the stream bed is things like your grasses and your sedges and things like that aren't going to obstruct flood flow, whereas trees will, even flaxes will, and just making sure that some of those larger plants that you pull back further from the edge of the stream, so that you don't actually create an impediment to water flow during flood. There's other exotic species like some of the alders are really good deep rooting plants. One of the issues with poplars and with willows is that they are shallow rooting, and particularly as they get bigger, you'll have seen it on your hill country around Gisborne in those storms. They get big, they get top heavy, they blow over. They've got a massive root plate that they pull up, and that just adds to the problem. So plants that don't grow as tall to reduce that risk of wind damage, or if you've got taller plants, ones that have got deep rooting systems, like some of the oaks, the alders, as I said, Tairāwhiti is a good deep rooter, and just start looking at those sorts of options.
Hi Angus, Brian Gibson here. Like most beekeepers, I love a lot of noxious weeds. I won't go into that, but I love gorse. Are you familiar with a weed called fleabane? It's fleabane. Fleas, It grows in forestry cutover to about 1.5 meters in height. About 2 years after harvesting, when the young radiata are growing, it's sometimes seen as a weed, but it flowers profusely in February and March and gives a really good honey flow. And my hives winter wonderfully in these sites. I don't know whether it's a noxious weed. I tried to persuade my friends in forestry not to spray it.
It's a daisy. It's erigeron.
It's a daisy. Yeah, I'm just looking at that one here. Erigeron. What is the problem with fleabane?
No problem at all.
Lots of seeds. So it probably spreads everywhere. I'm not aware whether that's on our weed busters.
It's not on our weed list specifically, and it's not, I haven't seen it on the list. It's just a daisy, but the problem with it is that the seeds are lifted up easily by the wind and dispersed really far.
I looked it up once, and I think there are two types of fleabane, and it doesn't look like a daisy to me at all. It's about that high.
Broadleaf.
These two kinds.
It's not a daisy, I'm sure.
Well, it says fleabane here is original on it.
Should be talking about fireweed.
It's similar to fireweed, but it's not the
Is
same.
it broadleaf fleabane?
Positively identified and then having a look on your weed busters list, because if it's, you know, if it's not a problem as a weed, then I guess you've got an option to use that, unless somebody from the GDC's got a strong view on how that, you know,
Leave it alone.
not wanting to put you on the spot or anything, but you know, it's an issue that we've had. I mean, some of our earlier work was to do with in Canterbury with clearing of crack and grey willow along the streams and clearing the force, and then beekeepers finding out that they had crucial gaps. Now, it's not a problem that those weeds are being cleared, but if it fulfills a function for somebody like that, then you need to be thinking about, well, what is it that we can put in its place that isn't a weed problem that fills that gap in bee forage.
Who's next?
Oh, I've got a question actually. I'll ask Angus. Yeah, Angus, a question for you. And you know this site, you know Paul and Jenny Teachin's place. He's just milled, partially milled. He's going to mill all these pine trees up the back there. It's steep country, typical Gisborne steep, erodible, soft rock country. He's probably wanting to plant it in a mix of species. He'll probably put a bit of pine back. Knowing that block, what would you suggest in the way of natives and a mix of exotics there?
Well, it's an interesting challenge because, I mean, it's something that's just made Paul a bunch of money that's going to allow him to do other things on his land. But he's also aware from some of those other little steep escarpments at the back of his property that in some of these storm events, he's still getting slumping there. And even around where the willows and the poplars were, he was getting that problem. Interestingly, where the oaks were established and the alders and those other deeper rooters, things actually managed well there. I don't know whether he's still what the intentions are there with the watercourse that runs through there. But you'd have to look at some sort of a reasonable riparian planting program in there. And as I said before, it's your grasses around those margins, gradually going into smaller shrub species and flaxes that can help stabilise without impeding water flow. Establishing sizable areas of natives is an interesting challenge. I've been party to some stuff where people are talking comfortably $20,000, $30,000, $40,000 a hectare for establishing native vegetation, and to my way of thinking, that's nice if you've got vast amounts of money to do that. Your average farmer doesn't have $40,000 a hectare to spend on native afforestation, unless maybe it's a small area. So I tend to work on the basis of using your colonising species, and dependent on rainfall, your Manuka and your Kānuka are the two classics there, to get vegetation established, and then you can interplant that with your and again, depending on what else is around in terms of seed source. We've done that elsewhere. We've used Manuka or Kānuka and let the birds do the rest. But if you want to have a productive use out of that, long term, do you look at that as a site where, if you grew topra, for example, that you'd be able to start doing some selective harvesting there within 50 or 60 years, then you'd interplant that in underneath that colonising species within 5 or 10 years once that's established, and it gives something for those podocarps to grow through. But again, it depends on the purpose. If you're a honeyboy, you might want to fill that whole curry up with railroad and be happy with that.
Yep. Thanks, Angus.
Oh, hey, Angus. One thought I had is to get around that cost of establishing natives. Has anyone looked at, like a hybrid version where you put something like Tairāwhiti, it's a nitrogen fixing, short-lived, interplanted with your more mature native species, and then
there's a range of options there, and I think where I've tended to use the Manukānika route, for example, is where we're just doing about 120 hectares up near Auckland, where it's going to be part of an offset for a land user up there who's having to clear some native and needs to re-establish elsewhere. So it has to go back into a native species as that initial prop. But if you've got, you might have, I don't know if you've seen the stuff that Barry's been involved with up there, where using the Tairāwhiti, and it's again it's deep rooting. It brings the bees in. It's got a lightish canopy on it, and it's really good. It brings the birds in, so it brings in your seeds. And I think if you've got a seed source within flying distance, then pretty much whatever you get established there is a scrub cover to start off with. I mean, gorse is brilliant, but we can't plant that. But it gives you options there to get some quick cover established and start protecting that slope while your regeneration takes place.
Thank you.
Did you?
Angus, Jeremy here. I was just going to, how are you? A quick question about the quality of nectar. You might find good sources of nectar all over the place, but some nectar has got more protein than other nectar. So I don't know whether you or Linda want to answer that, but I just observed that you can have a tree yielding huge amount of nectar that's not very valuable for bees, and you can have another type of tree yielding a smaller amount of nectar, which is really high in protein, and it puts some real horsepower into the hive. So can you just comment on that?
Yeah, it's probably more of a Linda question, that one, but it is an important part of the work that we're doing, and anything that's on our bee forage plant list is a good provider.
Yeah, basically the most protein the bees are going to get, it's going to come from the pollen. And then the nectar has some amino acids in it and a lot of antioxidants and other good phytochemicals in it. So the trouble with looking at nectar is very hard to know that a tree has that the flowers are giving a lot of nectar. But you can tell by when the bees are buzzing on it, then you look at the flower and see, are they taking pollen or are they taking nectar at different times of day? And nectar is very difficult to study. It's very difficult to comment on. I get most of my information from the literature. But for protein, you really need to go for the pollen. So those trees, and then I don't know how you would know whether your bees were getting enough protein would just be how well the hive is doing. Does that answer your question? But the protein, the amount of, the pollen is almost like we get 20 to 55% of the pollen is nitrogen. So we get really high, but you'll never get that in nectar. Next.
This question is to do with bank stabilisation. It goes back to the first question raised about what you plant. One of the factors you didn't mention in your species choice is the morphology of the banks themselves. How steep are they? What is the material that you're trying to plant into? Is it silt? Is it gravel? things like willow, for example, would work well in a shallow bank that's made of gravel, like you see in the Motueka, for example. But a lot of the banks up here, they're probably 10 to 15 metres long. That's from the top of the bank down to the bottom. It's all silt and sand, and it's prone to slumping following floods. So the real problem we've got is no matter what you establish, there are times like we've just had with cyclones that those banks fail massively and they just take everything with them. So what the hell do you do? Do you bother? Or do you just live with the situation? Yeah.
And that's a hell of a challenge for the Gisborne Flats there, because as you say, it's very friable and it gets flooded. I guess it's from what I understand, and I haven't had a chance to have a good look since the last storms. I had a look on some hill country last year, and when you were after early last year, and when you're looking at slopes where half-metre high grass is flattened because of the water flow coming down those slopes, you get to understand the sort of the scale of the issue that you're dealing with. As I understand it on the flats, what helped the most there was actually having good flood protection works in place. It doesn't necessarily help your stream margin, but it does, it protects elsewhere, because the issue is that if you, if you're planting something there that's going to vigorously hold on to that parts of that stream edge, then we've seen it elsewhere with willows, for example, and their roots start expanding and they start pushing out into the water flow. And even in floods and in moderate flood events, they start affecting how that stream behaves, and you want to avoid that as well. So I'm not 100% certain what you can do on the planting side of things, right on the stream margin, in these highly erodible soils. Probably the only advantage is that it's actually fertile stuff, as opposed to some of what we've got in the South Island, is that the alluvial flats there are so infertile, they're bloody hard to grow anything on them anyway.
Yeah, we would have no trouble.
I don't know if that helps at all.
In a way. But our soils on the riverbanks are very fertile, or tend to be. That's not a problem in terms of establishing things. But you did mention stratifying your plantings with things like flax, which can tolerate sedimentation, have those down towards the base of the bank. Perhaps some of your characters.
Grasses along the edge, they can fold over under the water. Even with flaxes, you don't want them too close to where your flood flow is, because they get big, and they don't necessarily help you sort of divert the flow too much. But then if it's bad enough and they get eroded, then suddenly they get pulled away and they become part of the blockage. And I've seen it on other areas where the flooding shouldn't have been so bad, but they had flaxes right on the edge of the stream that got undercut and dropped into the water, and it got to a choke point, and suddenly they flooded and the water was going all the way across the paddocks. So it's, I've got a very rough diagram of that in the handbook, where it's sort of looking at what those flood zones are. And I think it's important to recognise that you don't put anything that becomes a blockage, or if it's so big that it gets swept away, it can then contribute to a blockage downstream.
Yeah, totally agree.
The water can flow over the top of it, and hopefully you've got enough of it. It doesn't undercut it.
One species you didn't mention is the cabbage tree. I think they have a role in riparian areas, but again, higher up in the bank, very deep-rooted.
Losing
One species you didn't mention was cabbage trees. They have a very deep rooting system and could play a good part in stabilising banks, but only if they're placed.
But I think also again you would put those further back from the edge.
Yes.
Because it's got a truck that can snag, slash and things like that and then contribute to the flooding. So it's about understanding what those zones are and as I said, your sedges and your grasses and your reeds and things like that along your margins that will tolerate some flooding but won't impede the flow during a storm event.
Okay, unders and overs.
Yeah. I got one more down here.
Yeah, hi, I'm Craig from GDC. So just back to the osiers, it's we've actually just been planting them recently along the riverbanks because when they get high floodwaters, they're actually just. Can you hear me?
That mic's that mic's connected to the camera.
Just connected to
Oh.
the camera. Sorry.
So I was just saying with the osiers, we've started planting them on the riverbanks with GDC. We don't have a large supply of them, but we know that when they... Sorry.
Hold it up to your mouth.
Yeah. We know that when they get pushed over in high floods, they normally stay there and then you get a lot of suckers will come up from them. So that's a plant that we've been using recently. We just don't have a big stock of them, but it's something we would like to promote more in the future rather than the bigger willows. But it's interesting that I don't think any of us knew that they were actually used with the for beekeeping as well. So that's got an added benefit there that we didn't know about. Yeah. Osiers, it's a
Because it's got there's about 20 odd species in there that, Linda spent a whole season with a couple of students going through it. Flowering timing and sampling pollen.
Yeah, shrub willow.
Yeah.
There's a mixture there of tree willows, but also osier willows, that you can extend the flowering season from, July, August, right through to November. And willows have very high quality pollen and nectar. And so they are brilliant for spring build-up to beekeepers. And if you can use them appropriately in those sort of stabilisation work. And as I said, you've got the advantage that if they're starting to get a bit big, then you can cut them back and they'll come away again. That's quite a nice solution.
Yeah, and osier is the name of a group of willows. They're shrubs, and it's an old-fashioned name. An osier.
Basket willows, isn't it?
Yeah, they're the ones that you can weave baskets with.
And they don't grow too big either.
Yeah, they're not like big trees or anything. They're just lovely shrubs, but they're delicate kind of shrubs because they got the branches can be woven. Yeah. Does anybody else want to ask something?
I can do one last question.
Okay.
Yeah, Angus here, Barry here. After this, we're going to have a bit of a walk around some selected trees at Eastwoodhill here, and included in that is the Alnus nitida, the Himalayan elder, and also there'll be a selection of oaks, obviously English oak, and one also I think it's a Himalayan oak. Do you know anything about the root runs of those species and how they might be good for erosion control?
I'm not certain specifically on Nitida for the order, but your Italian order, which is a spring flower, is a big rooter. As is Chromastigine, which is it's a Chinese hill water, and that's something that has been available, and it grows well on dry hill country too. And so they're both deep rooted. Oaks tend to be a deep rooter as well. I mean, your Rhoda and your Rhoda fastigiata are both deep rooted trees. And I like the mix of you know, a quick growing, spreading shallow rooter mixed in with deep rooting plants.
Yeah.
Because that helps stitch things together a bit better. And I think with, you know, if you've got your deep rooters like some of those orchids and oaks, then you don't have to manage them like with poplars.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, Jeremy will know what I'm talking about in terms of up at Matahia there. Some of those ones up on those steep slopes, you know, they're getting up to 20, 30 years old. They're getting 25, 30 metres high with big spreading crowns, and you get some of those storms and they get a bit brittle and they break or they blow and they pull up a massive root plate with them. So to manage that risk, you've actually got to be in a position where you can drop those periodically. And climbing a tree with a chainsaw to take the top half out of it is a certain type of bravery. So, you know, and that's where I come back to the shrub willows. I know it's a harder thing to manage when you've got livestock involved, but that's where if you can find the areas where you can protect those and you have that shallow rooting from something that's not going to become a maintenance issue for you longer term, and you intersperse that with your larger trees with deep rooting, it's quite a nice mix. And that's where Tairāwhiti is good, it's a deep rooter.
Yeah.
It's also where Koromiko is very good because it's a deep rooter and it's an autumn flower. And this is, if you think about perhaps how you organise your paddocks and things like that, and if you've got corners that you know you need to protect and fence and keep your livestock out of, then some of those species become options there.
Mike.
How do you know these oaks are deep rooted? Are you going on North American examples, or have you seen deep rooted oaks in New Zealand?
I'm sorry, I'm having trouble hearing it. It's become up a bit.
How do you know that oaks are deep rooted? Are you using North American or European examples, or have you seen upturned oak in New Zealand?
I haven't excavated any in New Zealand. They are described as a deep rooted species. And same with some of those alders, and that's, I mean, it's one of the reasons that your Aldus cordata, or your Italian alder, is used in orchards because it's deep rooting, and it's not a spreading root that's going to then go and interfere with your orchard species.
Okay, the problem we've got here on the coast is that we haven't got enough soil depth for them to be deep rooted, so they may not be applicable in many situations on the east coast. Does that make sense? I mean,
yeah, I do. I don't know if Mike's there today, but I don't know, he's done a lot of work, pretty more on native species and that, and looking at those root depths.
oh, I think that's me.
You should introduce yourself.
Oh, sorry. It is I, Mike.
I guess what I've tended to see with species with that is that it tends to be more, well, it's a combination, I guess, of soil and also moisture limitations. You know, where I've, you know, got a place in the Upper Waitaki with pine trees, which typically tend to root quite deeply, and they don't go deeper than about half a metre because there's no moisture. You don't have that moisture limitation up on the east coast. Do you have, I mean, are we talking a hard hand here, Mike, or is it just, I mean, or are you getting, so I suppose what you're talking about then is you're talking about your sitting over that sort of, that solid mudstone that's pretty impervious.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, we've got two broad geological zones here. We call it tertiary versus tertiary, just based on the age of the rock formations. tertiary hill country, you know, once you get off the ridges, you're down to probably less than half a metre of soil. And that's not enough depth for root systems to develop to support a very tall tree. And that's why we're finding mid-rotation trees basically just sliding off the hill. And you have a look at their root systems, and they're plate-like, so only half a metre deep, and they follow the contact with the impervious underlying mudstone. Different story in the other terrain, where you got earth flows and slumps, much larger deep-seated failures. The root systems, because the rock materials towards the surface are very shattered, the roots can penetrate down much deeper, and that's why pine trees have been so successful in that tertiary hill country terrain in stabilising earth flows. They're able to put down their roots, you know, 2 to 3 metres, and yeah, it works well. But we're struggling with something on growing tall tree species on this tertiary hill country, because they will fall over eventually.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the challenge then, I guess, how would you describe tall in that sense? I mean, you talk about mid-rotation failure with pine there.
Yeah.
Are we looking 10, 15, 20 metres height, or?
Yeah, 12, 15 metre trees.
12 to 15 metres.
Yeah. It's just simply not enough roots there to support them. And, you know, to get...
Sorry, carry on.
You get storms that produce an awful lot of rainfall. The soils become saturated. Basically, the roots are the last line of defence, but there's not enough rooting system there to hold the tree on the slope.
I think the other comment I'd make on that, and it's you know, to do with our beloved radiata pine, is it's such a big, aggressive, arrogant tree. You know, with a big, heavy, stiff crown on it, and you see that sort of some of the poplars and willows as well, and they've got such a large sail area in them that it magnifies its interaction with the wind. And when I know, you know, if we're thinking here about what we can do for riparian or shade and shelter planting and those sorts of things, then I guess what that brings me back to is saying, well, let's have a look at species in those sorts of sites that, you know, might get up to 10 or 12 metres, but also aren't as, don't have such a big, heavy crown. So you've got things like some of your pittosporums, some of your smaller Hoheria, your shrubs like your Koromiko and things like that can fulfil that function, because they're hopefully not going to get to a point where that lack of soil depth is going to become a limiting factor in a storm situation.
Yeah, and to be fair to what we've seen during Hale and Gabriel is that they have been exceptional storms. And I can only think back to Cyclone Bowler, where we did see this mid-rotation trees failing for the very same reason. Just too much rainfall.
Mike, we live in an environment where exceptional storms are happening now all the time.
Yes, that's right.
I was in Denmark last week, and we were in an area where just later in that week it was under 8 feet of water.
Jeez, yeah.
From a storm surge, and dikes have been breached that have been in place for 100 years.
Mm.
And the comment from the meteorologists was, "Oh, well, this is a unique and unusual event. I mean, how many storm events? You know, go back to, I'm familiar with Jeremy's farm up here. How many big storms hit that over about 18 months? There's about 3 or 4 of them. So I guess we just have to we have to be prepared for that, because that's part of the change that's happening."
That's right. I'll leave it at that.
That's great.
Thank you.
So I guess my point there, I guess, is that if that is the case, then you know, I take your point on those tertiary sites. Then perhaps we can't then rely on what we describe as deep rooting plants that have got big high canopies on them to to be able to withstand that unless we think that their sail area isn't going to be such a problem that they're going to bend too much in the wind, and so some of your fastigian form trees might be okay in that sort of a scenario.
I think that they're going to end in about 5 minutes. The Zoom call is going to end in about 5 minutes, Angus.
Yep.
So probably we can fit in one more quick question if anybody has one. Everybody happy? Okay, well then I'll hand it over to Barry. We'll close it there and we'll describe the field trip next. Okay, well thank you, Angus, very much for your time.
Welcome.
Thank you very much, Angus.
Have a great tour around Eastwoodhill. Would love to be there.
Yeah.
Enjoy it. It's a fabulous place.
Okay, I'll just switch that off if I can there.
Okay, so the field trip is in 2 parts. We're going to go down what is it? The
Green Walk.
The Green Walk. And we're going to show you a couple of really fantastic bee plants. They're my favorite. and we tried to keep it to be big trees for you guys, but I didn't think we were interested in little ones. So, and then Anthea, is going to, and Barry they're going to shuttle everybody over to the next walk, which is down in Pear Park, where you'll see a lot of other really good trees.
So I've got a list of trees, and the very first ones are just out the window here, which are the row of English oaks. Which, magnificent timber, very good bee forage, and everything else an oak produces for you. So this is a selection for the future, perhaps. But we can jump on some vehicles, can we?
Made me that big thing because he said, yes, we can reach way up into the tree. And one morning I was late with breakfast and he came running in and he said that he had oak pollen. And I said, no, you don't have oak pollen, that's wrong. I mean, there's no way that you collected oak pollen. What he was doing was standing on the porch there and reaching over, because he saw that he's very sharp-eyed, more than me, and he, well, because I'm old. And he said that he was sure and I said, prove it. So we went there, and he showed me, and we captured the bees, and I saw the bees taking the pollen from the catkin, and I said, I can't believe it. I never thought an oak tree would be a good bee tree. And so that wasn't the end of the story, because once I became convinced, then we went around and we did maybe 10 oaks around this in that year. But then I got to the beekeeper meeting and I said, guess what, guys? We've got a solution for, there's other plants as well, but the oak trees are really good and they flower in that October crash between the clover, between the willow stopping and the clover starting. And they said, no way, Jose, no, you don't have. And I said, we do, I can prove it. And it took me a really long time to convince beekeepers, because then they started looking with their own bees, and they started, oh my gosh. But they're very inconspicuous because they blend into the flower. It's a long catkin, a male flower, and it's a long catkin just loaded with pollen. And so it's very historic, John Noel was a most wonderful student, but all these oaks, I mean, in general, I would say I'd be surprised that an oak does not give good pollen for a bee. If it does not, it's because it's not flowering. Otherwise, the pollen always turns out to be good pollen in its protein content, and the pollen is always very accessible to the bees. They just run up and down the catkin, just real easy.
Does each tree have male and female flowers?
Yes.
So there's
yes.
not male trees and female trees?
No. Oak has, I have a technical term for it, we don't need it, but it's the male, and all the things like, there's many trees that have catkins. The maple, it happens in maple, it happens in fraxinus, ash. There's many that have, if you're seeing a long catkin, the bees are going to get pollen from that. They won't get nectar out of that kind of tree because the female doesn't, it's wind pollinated, and the female doesn't have to attract any insects. And you won't see insects on the female flower, on an acorn or you know what's going to be an acorn or whatever.
So if it's a cat, you've got a catkin that's wind pollen.
Usually, if you see long dangly, especially either if the anthers are long dangly and shake around, and in dry pollen, then usually that's wind pollinated, and long catkins are even more. But it has to be, and the flowers, the male flowers, they don't have petals, so they're not showy. Yeah.
What about birches?
Sorry?
Birches. Any birches?
I haven't found bees on birch, but I've looked at birch.
Okay.
But not all of them are really good. Like an elm tree's a little bit, even poplars, they don't really go to poplars for pollen, they go to poplars for resin. So.
What time of maturity would an oak tree flower? I mean, they're not flowering fast.
That's the big thing. If you plant an oak tree, you might have to wait 5, 6, 10. I mean, John, do you know, or does anybody know, Barry? 10, 15 years,
You've
maybe?
got some scarlet oaks down the road down here at Rangimoy Station, and they were planted, I think, about yay high about 4 years ago. They maybe, the ones we looked at the other day, I couldn't see any catkins on them, so it might take a few more years before they mature for catkins.
Yeah, when you plant oaks, you're planting for a 500-year period, and so you're probably going to have to wait 10 years to get the flowers. But when you do, it's amazing, because there's one of our demo farms, Kintail Farm, and they have a big English oak, and we planted a lot of oaks there. The oaks haven't given the flowers yet, but that English oak, the bees are, it's what, I don't know if we're going to find this today. I hope we do at least once. But when you're walking along and you hear bzzz, and then you look at where that is, and then you see a tree with just gazillions of bees on it, that's what we call a buzz tree. And you know that has really good nectar, or really good nectar and pollen, or both. So you can discover your own bee trees on your own land. Yeah. Okay, so we'll go to the next one.
I think another point about oaks is that, as you mentioned, that they're very long-lived, and
Yes.
you can plant an oak there, and it can be for 7 generations or 500 years.
Yeah.
Indeed, English oaks are like that.
Most of them are like that. I mean, they're really good. And almost every oak. I've not seen an oak yet that is not. If there's pollen on it, the bees will be on it.
How old are these oaks?
We have some ages of oaks in my notes, but not this one. You'll see it when we get to the second part.
Sorry.
I don't know if I can stand here. The reason why we're showing you this maple is that, like oaks, all the oaks are good. Maple, we found out, and I believe I'm fairly correct on this, maybe not completely correct, all the maples are good. And people go, maples? I never saw a flower on a maple tree, but those flowers are there. They're hermaphrodite flowers, beautiful nectar, and really good pollen. Maybe not a lot of pollen, but good pollen, as good as a pear or an apple. So all the maples, I mean, maybe not Japanese maple, but the big maples, and this one is a really, really good one. And all the maples have, this is from China and Asia. Eastwoodhill has a lot of Asian stuff, which is really good. And there's about 150 species in Acer, but you have to watch out for storm damage on them. They're not strong. And Angus found that some of them don't tolerate frost. But they do in Canada, the maples there. So you have to figure out which maple you want. But what we did was, when we had that October crash problem that initiated our research, our solution was oaks, maples, and ash, and blossom trees. They all flower in that October gap. So if you're a beekeeper, that's what you go for. And there's just gazillions of maples that you can do. And this is a particularly good one that we find. So grow in wet and dry. Its ecological conditions are very wide-ranging, and it's autumn flowering. It's one of the 4 Alnus species that flower in the autumn. The other ones are Alnus formosana, Alnus nepalensis, which I've talked to somebody about, and Alnus, those are Asian species, they flower in autumn, and Alnus marithna or something, I'm sorry. I don't have that, I can't read my own writing. But they're North American, so all the other than those 4 species, all the other Alnus flower in spring. And so this one is just so precious because it's one of the few plants I found flowering in autumn. And you need that pollen in autumn for bees, because when the bees are going into their autumn, if they don't have good pollen with high protein, they won't be strong bees and they won't make it through to the winter. They have to go for 2 to 3 to 4 months, depending on what kind of winter you have. So it's very, very important. And they're again, it's the unisexual flowers. They're catkins, and then the female is on a different flower. The only really weedy Alnus is Alnus glutinosa, a spring flowering. So that one that's on the list, but the other ones aren't.
It's a really pretty tree, unfortunately.
Which one? Alnus
glutinosa.
Yeah.
I've got some, and they're really
Have
nice.
you?
Yeah, they're cool
Yeah.
trees.
Yeah. So this one is. I mean, it's so beautiful because of, it's one of the few plants that do wet and dry.